Well, since the year 2019 is now over and done with, I decided to do a list of my top 15 favorite films that came out in the past year. Now, this is just my personal list. I'm not saying all of these are necessarily the best movies, they're just my personal favorites. Also, there are a lot of movies that came out last year that I actually didn't get a chance to see, so there are some movies that I probably would have put on this list had I seen them. So, don't be too disappointed if a movie that you really liked ended up not making the list. Number 15 on my list is Rocketman, which instead of being a straight biopic on Reginald Dwight, better known as Elton John, the film is actually a musical fantasy simply based on the life of Elton John. Now, I'm really not a musical fan, but I am a fan of Elton John's music, and the film is a great love letter to Elton John. At the same time, it does not shy away from some of the darker aspects of Elton John's life. The movie touches on his drug addiction, his alcoholism, and it's actually a really moving drama about overcoming addiction. The movie, of course, goes into his homosexuality and people not really understanding that. And I would recommend it if you are a fan of his. The movie also ends with a really well done recreation of the music video for Elton John's I'm Still Standin'. Number 14 on my list is Knives Out, a really clever take on the murder mystery genre. And the movie is hilarious, but it's also a really good murder mystery, and it's a really good thriller. Number 13 on my list is Avengers Endgame, which is an epic conclusion to the Thanos storyline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I know some people have criticized the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies for taking away from more intellectually driven cinema, and I agree with that to a certain extent. I agree with it to the extent that I think people should be paying attention to more than just the summer blockbuster films. But I would argue that these films have shown an attention to storytelling and an attention to their characters that I think is very much evident in both this movie and the Avengers movie that came before it. Now, of course it's not the final film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Shortly after this you had Spider-Man Homecoming, and they're coming out with the Black Widow movie, and I know this franchise has made Disney and Marvel billions of dollars, so I know the series is not ending anytime soon, but if this were the end of the series, this would be a hell of a swan song. Number 12 on my list is Shazam, a movie that really did surprise the hell out of me, because from the trailers, the movie looked like crap, but the film honestly has a lot of heart, and it's not just a really good superhero comedy, but it's also a really good coming-of-age story, and it's easily my favorite of the DC Extended Universe movies. Now, it's certainly not a horror film, but there are actually demons in this movie, and the fact that they introduce demons into it makes me wonder if maybe DC's going to try to take some of their more horror-oriented stuff and incorporate that into their cinematic universe. Number 11 on my list is Ready or Not, a really clever horror comedy. The movie's about a young woman who marries into this very wealthy family who have actually sold their souls to the devil, and in order to survive, they have to sacrifice her to Lucifer, resulting in a very fucked up game of hide-and-seek. It's a very funny movie, but also a genuinely suspenseful movie as well. Number 10 on my list is Us from Jordan Peele, which personally I liked better than Get Out. Now, don't get me wrong, Get Out was a good movie, and Get Out might have arguably have been a better written movie, and might have been a little more defined in what it was trying to say. And with Get Out, I knew where the film was going, whereas this, I really didn't. And the film really did feel like an elongated Twilight Zone episode. And the film was just so creepy and nightmarish. And something that Jordan Peele does so well in both this and Get Out is you really do care about the characters, and you care about their situation. Number 9 on my list is Godzilla King of the Monsters. Now, at the end of 2014, I did include Gareth Edwards' reboot of Godzilla on my video of my favorite films of 2014. Looking back on it, I probably shouldn't have included that movie on that list because, while I do like the Gareth Edwards Godzilla, I have a lot of problems with it, and my problems with that movie have only increased over the years. When I'm looking back on this video in a couple of years, I don't think I'm gonna have a problem with the fact that I put this movie on the list, because I had so much damn fun with this movie. Now, I can understand this movie not appealing to some people, because this is really a movie made for Godzilla fans, and I grew up on Godzilla. I often joke that Godzilla is part of my DNA, but I've been a Godzilla fan since I was 3 years old, and this really was a big-budgeted Hollywood version of the movies that I grew up with. Now, was it a great movie? No. But I wasn't really expecting greatness at this point. I think my issue with the Gareth Edwards one is I went into that movie expecting greatness. I went into that movie expecting the original Godzilla, which really wasn't fair. I went into this movie with lower expectations and really just fell in love with it because this really was more of a tribute to the cheesier, campier Godzilla films of like the late 60s or early 70s. But it still has some serious social commentary, whereas the original Godzilla was making a commentary on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and whereas some of the Godzilla sequels were making a commentary on the arms race, this is very much making a commentary on climate change. And the film is almost the perfect amalgamation of the darker, more social commentary-driven Godzilla movies and the cheesier, campier Godzilla films. And it was great to see these monsters, especially King Ghidorah, done in this way, and it was amazing to hear Akira Ifukube's iconic Godzilla score used throughout the film. Number 8 on my list is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the most recent film from Quentin Tarantino, and this was a much more subdued and much more mature Tarantino movie than I think people were expecting. I think people were expecting the movie to be like ultra-violent and really over the top, which it does get towards the end, but really what this movie is it's a love letter to late 60s Hollywood, which was a time when Hollywood was going through a real transition. This was right at the beginning of the new Hollywood movement. And the film is also a love letter to 60s television. The movie is about a star on his way down, while it also follows a fictionalized version of Sharon Tate on her way up. Now, of course, Sharon Tate in real life was tragically murdered by members of the Manson family. This movie does alter history a little bit without giving too much away, but it does it in a very tasteful manner. Tasteful for the victims, not necessarily tasteful for members of the Manson family, but to be fair, I don't think those people really deserve to be portrayed in a tasteful manner. But the heart of the film really is the camaraderie and the chemistry between Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. And Brad Pitt plays such an amazing character in this movie, who's so likable despite the fact that it's heavily implied that this guy might have murdered his wife prior to the events of the film. Number 7 on my list is Jojo Rabbit, the political satire from Taika Waititi. I hope I'm saying his name right. And this is a hilarious movie, but it's also at times very heartbreaking and deeply moving, because while there is a lot of goofy stuff in the movie does not shy away from the horrors of war and just how horrible the Holocaust actually was. Like, in the film you have this boy who absolutely idolizes Adolf Hitler to a point where Hitler is actually his imaginary friend, but he slowly starts to realize that these people he looks up to are not good people at all. Number 6 on my list is Midsommar from Ari Aster, who previously directed Hereditary. I do think Hereditary was the better film, but this is a movie that has stuck with me ever since I saw it. It's a movie that definitely calls to mind films like The Wicker Man, the original Wicker Man, of course, not the shitty remake. And the thing that really struck me about this movie is you have this girl who's not treated very well by her boyfriend or her friends. In fact, her friends seem to have real contempt for her, yet the place where she's finally going to get love and respect is among this cult. Number 5 on my list is Dr. Sleep, Mike Flanagan's adaptation of the Stephen King novel of the same name. Now, the book Dr. Sleep was, of course, a sequel to Stephen King's novel The Shining, which was famously adapted by Stanley Kubrick, so the movie Dr. Sleep is, of course, a sequel to the Stanley Kubrick film. So, Mike Flanagan had the daunting task of trying to please both Stephen King fans and fans of the Stanley Kubrick film, which does change a lot from the original novel. And he's also doing a sequel to what is now considered to be one of the greatest films ever made, almost 40 years after the fact. It sounds like a project that was almost doomed to fail, but in my opinion, Mike Flanagan succeeded. Dr. Sleep, I think, is one of the best Stephen King adaptations in recent years, and definitely one of the best horror films of this year. And I think it's a damn shame that the movie did not do very well. Number 4 is Uncut Gems, which features probably Adam Sandler's best performance. Now, I was never really a big Adam Sandler fan. I don't have the steaming hot hatred for him that a lot of other people do, because there are some people who violently hate his movies. His movies just never really were my cup of tea, but this is easily his best performance. Now, I know Adam Sandler has done drama films before this, but I really hope this movie is sort of the impetus for him to take on more dramatic roles from here on out. In the film, Adam Sandler plays a jeweler with a gambling addiction, and throughout the film you see him dig himself into a deeper and deeper hole, and there are plenty of moments in the film where he could get himself out of this situation, but he doesn't do it because this is a man with an addiction, and he's a character who technically should be unlikable, yet you somehow care for him, despite the fact that all the problems he's facing in this movie are entirely his fault. Number 3 is Joker, which of course is based on one of the most legendary comic book villains of all time. The movie is a new take on the Joker's origin, but it portrays the Joker very realistically, and what this really is this is a psychological drama, very much in the same vein as movies like Taxi Driver and even Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Now, when Christopher Nolan did the Dark Knight trilogy, he got a lot of praise for taking the Batman mythos and setting it in a slightly more realistic universe, but there was still a lot of stuff in those movies that was very comic booky. In my opinion, Todd Phillips goes even further than Christopher Nolan did because Joker feels about as in the real world as we're ever going to get with something based on the Batman mythos. This movie also features an absolutely chilling, yet strangely sympathetic performance from Joaquin Phoenix. Number 2 is The Nightingale, an absolutely brutal and devastating, yet powerful revenge film directed by Jennifer Kent, who also directed The Babadook. It's a film that definitely got under my skin and definitely made me angry, because it shows you how human beings can just dehumanize each other based on things like race or gender or class. But while it is an upsetting film, it's also a deeply moving human drama. And my number 1 favorite film of 2019 is The Lighthouse, from Robert Eggers, who also directed The Witch. This is a very creepy and atmospheric film, but it's also a funny film too. There's a lot of humor in it. Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson play so well off each other as two lighthouse keepers who go more and more insane from cabin fever and a possible supernatural influence. And it definitely calls to mind films like The Shining or even The Thing, where you realize that these people are completely isolated from the rest of civilization. It's a great film, and I'm definitely planning on doing a standalone review on it at some point. Before I end this video, I just want to name off some honorable mentions. El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie. Glass, M. Night Shyamalan's sequel to his movie Unbreakable and his movie Split. John Wick Chapter 3, and the Child's Play remake. So, that was my list of my top 15 favorite films of 2019. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of the films I put on this list, and let me know what your favorite films of this year were.